Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Gods by Terry Pratchett, Part 18. It was the silence that awoke Lady Ramkin. Her bedroom looked out over the dragon pens, and she was used to sleeping to the susurration of rustling scales. Susurration, whispering, murmuring, or rustling. Her bedroom looked out over the dragon pens, and she was used to sleeping to the susurration of rustling scales, the occasional roar of a dragon flaming in its sleep, and the keening of the gravid females. Absence of any sound at all was like an alarm clock. Gravid, pregnant, carrying eggs or young. Gravid. And the keening of the gravid females. Absence of any sound at all was like an alarm clock. She had cried a bit before going to sleep, but not much, because it was no use being soppy and letting the side down. She lit the lamp, pulled on her rubber boots, grabbed the stick which might be all that stood between her and theoretical loss of virtue, and hurried down through the shadowy house. As she crossed the damp lawn to the kennels, she was vaguely aware that something was happening down in the city, but dismissed it as not currently worth thinking about. Dragons were more important. She pushed open the door. Well, they were still there. The familiar stink of swamp dragons. Half pond mud, and half chemical explosion gusted out into the night. Each dragon was balancing on its hind legs in the center of its pen, neck arched, staring with ferocious intensity at the roof. "Oh," she said, "flying around up there again, is it? Showing off? Don't you worry about it, children. Mummy's here." She put the lamp on a high shelf and stamped along to Errol's pen. "Well now, my lad," she began, and stopped. Errol was stretched out on his side. A thin plume of grey smoke was drifting from his mouth, and his stomach expanded and contracted like a bellows. And his skin from the neck down was an almost pure white. "I think if I ever rewrite diseases, you'll get a whole chapter all to yourself," she said quietly, and unbolted the gate of the pen. Click! "Let's see if that nasty temperature has gone down, shall we?" She reached out to stroke his skin and gasped. She pulled the hand back hurriedly and watched the blisters form on her fingertips. Errol was so cold, he burned. As she stared at him, the small round marks that her warmth had melted filmed over with frozen air. Lady Ramkin sat back on her haunches. "Just what kind of dragon are you?" she began. There was the distant sound of a knock at the front door of the house. She hesitated for a moment, then blew out the lamp, crept heavily along the length of the kennels, and pulled aside the scrap of sacking over the window. The first light of dawn showed her the silhouette of a guardsman on her doorstep, the plumes of his helmet blowing in the breeze. She bit her lip in panic, scuttled back to the door, fled across the lawn and dived into the house, taking the stairs 3 at a time. "Stupid, stupid," she muttered, realizing the lamp was back downstairs. But no time for that. By the time she went and got it, Vimes might have gone away. Working by feel and memory in the gloom, she found her best wig and rammed it on her head. Somewhere among the ointments and dragon remedies on her dressing table was something called, as far as she could remember, Dew of the Night, or some such unsuitable name. A present long ago from a thoughtless nephew. She tried several bottles before she found something that, by the smell of it, was probably the one. Even to a nose which had long ago shut down most of its sensory apparatus in the face of the overpoweringness of dragons, it seemed, well, more potent than she remembered. But apparently, men liked that kind of thing, or so she had read. Damn nonsense, really. She twitched the top hem of her suddenly far too sensible nightshirt into a position which, she hoped, revealed without actually exposing, and hurried back down the stairs. She stopped in front of the door, took a deep breath, twisted the handle, and realized even as she pulled the door open that she should have taken the rubber boots off. "Why, Captain," she said winsomely, "this is a... Who the hell are you?" The head of the palace guard took several steps backwards, and, because he was of peasant stock, made a few surreptitious signs to ward off evil spirits.
Surreptitious.
Surreptitious, kept secret especially because it would not be approved of. Surreptitious, secret. Made a few surreptitious signs to ward off evil spirits. They clearly didn't work. When he opened his eyes again, the thing was still there, still bristling with rage, still reeking of something sickly and fermented, still crowned with a skewed mass of curls, still looming behind a quivering bosom that made the roof of his mouth go dry. He'd heard about these sort of things. Harpies, they were called. What had it done with Lady Ramkin? The sight of the rubber boots had him confused, though. Legends about harpies were short on references to rubber boots. "Out with it, fellow!" Lady Ramkin boomed, hitching up her nightie to a more respectable neckline. "Don't just stand there opening and shutting your mouth. What do you want?" "Lady Sybil Ramkin," said the guard, not in the polite way of someone seeking mere confirmation, but in the incredulous tones of someone who found it very hard to believe the answer could be yes. "Use your eyes, young man. Who do you think I am?" The guard pulled himself together. "Only I've got a summons for Lady Sybil Ramkin," he said uncertainly. Her voice was withering. "What do you mean, a summons?" "To attend upon the palace, you see." "I can't imagine why that is necessary at this time in the morning," she said, and made to slam the door. It wouldn't shut, though, because of the sword point jammed into it at the last moment. "If you don't come," said the guard, "I have been ordered to take steps." The door shot back, and her face pressed against his, almost knocking him unconscious with the scent of rotting rose petals. "If you think you'll lay a hand on me," she began. The guard's glance darted sideways, just for a moment, to the dragon kennels. Sybil Ramkin's face went pale. "You wouldn't," she hissed. He swallowed. Gulp. Fearsome though she was only human. She could only bite your head off metaphorically. There were, he told himself, far worse things than Lady Ramkin, although admittedly they weren't 3 inches from his nose at this point in time. "Take steps," he repeated in a croak. She straightened up and eyed the row of guards behind him. "I see," she said coldly. "That's the way it is? 6 of you to fetch 1 feeble woman. Very well. You will, of course, allow me to fetch a coat. It is somewhat chilly. She slammed the door. Bang! The palace guards stamped their feet in the cold and tried not to look at one another. This obviously wasn't the way you went around arresting people. They weren't allowed to keep you waiting on the doorstep. This wasn't the way the world was supposed to work. On the other hand, the only alternative was to go in there and drag her out. And it wasn't one anyone could summon any enthusiasm for. Besides, the guard captain wasn't sure he had enough men to drag Lady Ramkin anywhere. You'd need teams of thousands with log rollers. The door creaked open again, revealing only the musty darkness of the hall within. "Right, men," said the captain uneasily. Lady Ramkin appeared. He got a brief, blurred vision of her bounding through the doorway, screaming, and it might well have been the last thing he remembered if a guard hadn't had the presence of mind to trip her up as she hurtled down the steps. She plunged forward, cursing, plowed into the overgrown lawn, hit her head on a crumbling statue of an antique ramkin, and slid to a halt. The double-handed broadsword she had been holding landed beside her, bolt upright, and vibrated to a standstill. After a while, one of the guards crept forward cautiously and tested the blade with his finger. "Bloody hell!" he said in a voice of mixed horror and respect. "The dragon wants to eat her?" "Fits the bill," said the captain. "She's got to be the highest-born lady in the city. I don't know about maiden," he added, "and right at this minute I'm not going to speculate. Someone go and fetch a cart." He fingered his ear, which had been nicked by the tip of the sword. He was not by nature an unkind man, but at this moment he was certain that he would prefer the thickness of a dragon's hide between himself and Lady and Sybil Ramkin when she woke up. "Weren't we supposed to kill her pet dragon, sir?" said another guard. "I thought Mr. Warren said something about killing all the dragons." "That was just a threat we were supposed to make," said the captain. The guard's brow furrowed. "You sure, sir? I thought—" The captain had had enough of this. Screaming harpies and broadswords making a noise like tearing silk in the air beside him had severely ruined his capacity for seeing the other fellow's point of view. "Oh, you thought, did you?" he growled. "A thinker, are you? Do you think you'd be suitable for another posting then? City guard, maybe? They're full of thinkers, they are." There was an uncomfortable titter from the rest of the guards. "If you'd thought," added the captain sarcastically, "you'd have thought that the king is hardly going to want other dragons dead, is he? They're probably distant relatives or something. I mean, it wouldn't want us to go around killing its own kind, would it?" "Well, sir, people do, sir," said the guard sulkily. "Ah, well," said the captain, "that's different." He tapped the side of his helmet meaningfully. "Ding, ding." "That's 'cause we're intelligent." Vimes landed in damp straw and also in pitch darkness, although after a while his eyes became accustomed to the gloom and he could make out the walls of the dungeon. It hadn't been built for gracious living. It was basically just a space containing all the pillars and arches that supported the palace. At the far end, a small grill high on the wall let in a mere suspicion of grubby, second-hand light. There was another square hole in the floor. It was also barred. The bars were quite rusty, though. It occurred to Vimes that he could probably work them loose eventually, and then all he would have to do was slim down enough to go through a 9-inch hole. What the dungeon did not contain was any rats, scorpions, cockroaches, or snakes. It had once contained snakes, it was true, because Vimes's sandals crunched on small, long white skeletons. He crept cautiously along one damp wall, wondering where the rhythmic scraping sound was coming from. He rounded a squat pillar and found out. The patrician was shaving, squinting into a scrap of mirror propped against the pillar to catch the light. No, Vimes realized, not propped, supported, in fact, by a rat. It was a large rat with red eyes. The patrician nodded to him without apparent surprise. "Oh," he said. "Vimes, is it? I heard you were on the way down. Jolly good. You had better tell the kitchen staff." And here Vimes realized that the man was speaking to the rat. "That there will be 2 for lunch. Would you like a beer, Vimes?" "What?" said Vimes. "I imagine you would. Potluck, though, I am afraid. Skirp's people are bright enough, but they seem to have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to labels on bottles." Lord Veterinary patted his face with a towel and dropped it on the floor. A grey shape darted from the shadows and dragged it away down the floor grill. Then he said, "Very well, Skirp, you may go." The rat twitched its whiskers at him, leaned the mirror against the wall, and trotted off. "You're waited on by rats," said Vimes. "They help out, you know. They're not really very efficient, I'm afraid. It's their paws." But, said Vimes. "I mean, how?" "I suspect Skirp's people have tunnels that extend into the university," Lord Veterinary went on. "Although I think they were probably pretty bright to start with." At least Vimes understood that bit. It was well known that thermic radiations affected animals living around the unseen university campus, sometimes prodding them towards minute analogues of human civilization, and even mutating some of them into entirely new and specialized species, such as the .303 bookworm and the wolfish. And as the man said, rats were quite bright to start with. "But they're helping you," said Vimes. "Mutual. It's mutual. Payment for services rendered, you might say," said the patrician, sitting down on what Vimes couldn't help noticing was a small velvet cushion. On a low shelf, so as to be handy, were a notepad and a neat row of books. "How can you help rats, sir?" he said weakly. "Advice. I advise them, you know." The patrician leaned back. "That's the trouble with people like Once," he said. "They never know when to stop. Rats, snakes, and scorpions. It was sheer bedlam in here when I came. The rats were getting the worst of it too." And Vimes thought he was beginning to get the drift. "You mean you sort of trained them?" he said. Advised. "I suppose it's a knack," said Lord Veterinary modestly. Vimes wondered how it was done. Did the rats side with the scorpions against the snakes, and then, when the snakes were beaten, invite the scorpions to a celebratory slap-up meal and eat them? Or were individual scorpions hired with large amounts of, whatever it was scorpions ate, to sidle up to selected leading snakes at night and sting them? He remembered hearing once about a man who, locked up in a cell for years, trained little birds and created a sort of freedom. and he thought of ancient sailors shorn of the sea by old age and infirmity, who spent their days making big ships in little bottles. Then he thought of the patrician, robbed of his city, sitting cross-legged on the grey floor in the dim dungeon and recreating it around him, encouraging in miniature all the little rivalries, power struggles and factions. He thought of him as a sombre, brooding statue amid paving stones alive with silking shadows and sudden political death. It had probably been easier than ruling Ankh, which had larger vermin who didn't have to use both hands to carry a knife. There was a clink over by the drain. Clink! Half a dozen rats appeared, dragging something wrapped in a cloth. They rat-handled it past the grill and, with great effort, hauled it to the patrician's feet. He leaned down and undid the knot. "We seem to have a cheese, chicken legs, celery, a piece of rather stale bread, and a nice bottle. Oh, a nice bottle, apparently of Merkel and Stingbat's very famous brown sauce." "Beer, I said, Skirt." The leading rat twitched its nose at him. "Sorry about this, Vimes. They can't read, you see. They don't seem to get the hang of the concept, but they're very good at listening. They bring me all the news." "I see you're very comfortable here," said Vimes weakly. "Never build a dungeon you wouldn't be happy to spend the night in yourself," said the patrician, laying out the food on the cloth. "The world would be a happier place if more people remembered that. We all thought you had built secret tunnels and such like," said Vimes. "Can't imagine why," said the patrician. "One would have to keep on running, so inefficient. Whereas here I am at the hub of things. I hope you understand that, Vimes. Never trust any ruler who puts his faith in tunnels and bunkers and escape routes. The chances are that his heart isn't in the job." "Oh, he's in a dungeon in his own palace, with a raving lunatic in charge upstairs and a dragon burning the city, and he thinks he's got the world where he wants it. Must be something about high office. The altitude sends people mad." You don't mind if I have a look around, do you?" he said. "Feel free," said the patrician. Vimes paced the length of the dungeon and checked the door. Tuk, tuk, tuk. It was heavily barred and bolted, and the lock was massive. Then he tapped the walls in what might possibly be hollow places. Tap, tap, tap. There was no doubt that it was a well-built dungeon. It was the kind of dungeon you'd feel good about, having dangerous criminals put in. Of course, in those circumstances, you'd prefer there to be no trapdoors, hidden tunnels, or secret ways of escape. These weren't those circumstances. It was amazing what several feet of solid stone did to your sense of perspective. "Do guards come in here?" he demanded. "Hardly ever," said the patrician, waving a chicken leg. "They don't bother about feeding me, you see. The idea is that one should moulder, in fact," he said. "Up till recently, I used to go to the door and groan a bit every now and then just to keep them happy." "They're bound to come in and check, though," said Vimes hopefully. "Oh, I don't think we should tolerate that," said the patrician. "How are you going to prevent them?" Lord Veterinary gave him a pained look. "My dear Vimes," he said, "I thought you were an observant man. Did you look at the door?" "Of course I did," said Vimes, and added, "Sir, it's bloody massive. Perhaps you should have another look." Vimes gaped at him and then stamped across the floor and glared at the door. It was one of the popular dread portal variety, All bars and bolts and iron spikes and massive hinges. No matter how long he looked at it, it didn't become any less massive. The lock was one of those dwarfish made buggers that it'd take years to pick. All in all, if you had to have a symbol for something totally immovable, that door was your man. The patrician appeared alongside him in heart-stopping silence. "You see," he said, "it's always the case, is it not? That should a city be overtaken by violent civil unrest, the current ruler is thrown into the dungeons. To a certain type of mind, that is so much more satisfying than mere execution." "Well, okay, but I don't see," Vimes began. "And you look at this door, and what you see is a really strong cell door, yes? Of course, you've only got to look at the bolts and, I'm really rather pleased," said Lord Veterinary quietly. Vimes stared at the door until his eyebrows ached, and then, just as random patterns in cloud suddenly, without changing in any way, became a horse's head or a sailing ship, he saw what he'd been looking at all along. A sense of terrifying admiration overcame him. He wondered what it was like in the patrician's mind. All cold and shiny, he thought, all blue steel and icicles and little wheels clicking along like a huge clock. The kind of mind that would carefully consider its own downfall and turn it to advantage. It was a perfectly normal dungeon door, but it all depended on your sense of perspective. In this dungeon, the patrician could hold off the world. All that was on the outside was the lock. All the bolts and bars were on the inside. The rank clambered awkwardly across the damp rooftops as the morning mist was boiled off by the sun. Not that there would be any clear air today. Sticky swaths of smoke and stale steam wreathed the city and filled the air with the sad smell of dampened cinders. "What is this place?" said Carrot, helping the others along a greasy walkway. Sergeant Colin looked around at the forest of chimneys. "We're just above Jimkin Bear Hugger's Whiskey Distillery," he said. "On a direct line, see, between the palace and the plaza. It's bound to fly over here." Nobby looked wistfully over the side of the building. "I've been in there once," he said. "Checked the door one dark night and it just came open in my hand." "Eventually, I expect," said Colin sourly. "Well, I had to go in, didn't I? To check there was no miscreating? To check there was no miscreanting going on?"
Miscreanting.
"Well, I had to go in, didn't I? To check there was no miscreating going on? Amazing place in there, all pipes and stuff, and the smell." "Every bottle matured for up to 7 minutes," quoted Colin. "Ha! A drop before ye go, it says on the label. Damn right too. I had a drop once, and I went all day." He knelt down and unwrapped the long, sacking package he had been manhandling with extreme difficulty during the climb. This revealed a longbow of ancient design and a quiver of arrows. He picked up the bow slowly, reverentially, and ran his pudgy fingers along it. "You know," he said quietly, "I was damn good with this when I were a lad. The captain should have let me have a go the other night." "You keep on telling us," said Nobby unsympathetically. "Well, I used to win prizes." The sergeant unwound a new bowstring, looped it around one end of the bow, stood up, pressed down, grunted a bit. Carrot," he said, slightly out of breath. "Yes, Sarge. You any good at stringing bows?" Carrot grasped the bow, compressed it easily, and slipped the other end of the string into place. "That's a good start, Sarge," said Nobby. "Don't you be sarcastic with me, Nobby. It ain't strength. It's keenness of eye and steadiness of hand what counts. Now you pass me an arrow. Not that one." Nobby's fingers froze in the act of grasping a shaft. "That's my lucky arrow," spluttered Colin. "None of you is to touch my lucky arrow." "Looks just like any other bloody arrow to me, Sarge," said Nobby mildly. "That's the one I shall use for the actual wuss name, the coup de grace," said Colin. "Never let me down, my lucky arrow didn't. Hit whatever I shot at. Hardly even had to aim. If that dragon's got any vulnerables, that arrow will find 'em." He selected an identical looking but presumably less lucky arrow and knocked it. Then he looked around the rooftops with a speculative eye. "Better get my hand in," he muttered. "Of course, once you learn, you never forget. It's like riding something you never forget being able to ride." He pulled the bowstring back to his ear and grunted. "Right," he wheezed, as his arm trembled with the tension like a branch in a gale. "See the roof of the Assassin's Guild over there?" They peered through the grubby air. "Right then," said Colin. "And do you see the weather vane on it? Do you see it?" Carrot glanced at the arrowhead. It was weaving back and forth in a series of figure eights. "It's a long way off, Sarge," said Nobby doubtfully. "Never you mind me. You keep your eyes on the weather vane," groaned the sergeant. They nodded. The weather vane was in the shape of a creeping man with a big cloak. His outstretched dagger was always turned to stab the wind. At this distance, though, it was tiny. "Okay," panted Colin. "Now do you see the man's eye?" "Oh, come on," said Nobby. "Shut up, shut up, shut up," groaned Colin. "Do you see it, I said?" "I think I can see it, Sarge," said Carrot loyally. Right, said the sergeant, swaying backwards and forwards with effort. "Right, good lad. Okay, now keep an eye on it, right?" He grunted, "Doing!" and loosed the arrow. Whoosh! Several things happened so fast that they will have to be recounted in stop-motion prose. Probably the first was the bowstring slapping into the soft inner part of Colin's wrist, causing him to scream and drop the bow. This had no effect on the path of the arrow, which was already flying straight and true towards a gargoyle on the rooftop just across the road. It hit it on the ear, bounced, ricocheted off a wall 6 feet away, and headed back towards Colin, apparently at a slightly increased speed, going past his ear with a silky humming noise. Whoosh! It vanished in the direction of the city walls. After a while, Nobby coughed and gave Carrot a look of innocent inquiry. "About how big," he said. "Is a dragon's vulnerables, roughly?" "Oh, it can be a tiny spot," said Carrot helpfully. "I was sort of afraid of that," said Nobby. He wandered to the edge of the roof and pointed downwards. "There's a pond just here," he said. "They use it for cooling water in the stills. I reckon it's pretty deep, so after the sergeant has shot at the dragon, we can jump in it. What you say?" "Oh, but we don't need to do that," said Carrot, "because the sergeant's lucky arrow would have hit the spot and the dragon'll be dead, so we won't have anything to worry about." Granted, said Nobby hurriedly, looking at Colin's scowling face. "But just in case, if by 1,000,000 to 1 chance he misses, I'm not saying he will, mark you. You just have to think of all eventualities. If, by incredible bad luck, he doesn't quite manage to hit the vulnerable dead on, then your dragon is going to lose his rag, right? And it's probably a good idea not to be here. It's a long shot, I know. Call me a worrywart if you like. That's all I'm saying." Sergeant Colin adjusted his armor haughtily. "When you really need them the most," he said, "1,000,000 to 1 chances always crop up. Well-known fact." "The sergeant is right, Nobby," said Carrot virtuously. "You know that when there's just 1 chance, which might just work well, it works. Otherwise, there'd be no—" He lowered his voice. "I mean, it stands to reason, if last desperate chances don't work, there'd be no— well, the gods wouldn't let it be any other way. They wouldn't." As one man, the 3 of them turned and looked through the murky air towards the hub of the disk world, thousands of miles away. Now the air was grey with old smoke and mist shreds, but on a clear day it was possible to see Cori Celesti, home of the gods. Site of the home of the gods, anyway. They lived in Dun Manifestin, the stuccoed Valhalla, where the gods faced eternity with the kind of minds that were at a loss to know what to do to pass a wet afternoon. They played games with the fates of men, it was said. Exactly what game they thought they were playing at the moment was anyone's guess. But of course, there were rules. Everyone knew there were rules. They just had to hope like hell that the gods knew the rules too. "It's got to work," mumbled Cullen. "I'll be using my lucky arrow and all. You're right. Last hopeless chances have got to work. Nothing makes any sense otherwise. You might as well not be alive." Nobby looked down at the pond again. After a moment's hesitation, Colin joined him. They had the speculative faces of men who had seen many things and knew that while you could of course depend on heroes and kings and ultimately on gods, you could really depend on gravity and deep water. "Not that we'll need it," said Colin virtuously. "Not with your lucky arrow," said Nobby. "That's right, but just out of interest, how far down is it, do you think?" said Colin. "About 30 feet, I'd say, give or take." 30 feet, Colin nodded slowly. "That's what I'd reckon. And it's deep, is it?" "Very deep, I've heard." "I'll take your word for it. It looks pretty mucky. I'd hate to have to jump in it." Carrot slapped him cheerfully on the back, nearly pushing him over, and said, "What's up, Sarge? Do you want to live forever?" "Dunno. Ask me again in 500 years. "It's a good job we've got your lucky arrow then," said Carrot. Said Cullen, who seemed to be in a miserable daydream world of his own. I mean, it's a good job we've got a last desperate 1,000,000 to 1 chance to rely on, or we'd really be in trouble. Oh, yes, said Nobby sadly. Lucky old us. The patrician lay back. A couple of rats dragged a cushion under his head. Things are rather bad outside, I gather, he said. Yes, said Vimes bitterly. You're right. You're the safest man in the city. He wedged another knife in a crack in the stones and tested his weight carefully, while Lord Veterinary looked on with interest. He'd managed to get 6 feet off the floor and up to a level with the grill. Now he started to hack at the mortar around the bars.